The fog clung to the French countryside that morning, thick and suffocating, grounding the fighters and bombers that would normally fill the skies. But up in his Piper L4 Grasshopper, Major Charles Carpenter wasn't waiting for conditions to improve. When the mist finally began to thin around midday on September 20th, 1944, near Araucourt, his eyes were already scanning the open fields below. There they were, German tanks advancing in formation across the landscape toward American positions. His grip tightened on the control stick of the fragile observation plane, that flimsy aircraft never meant for what he was about to do. Just days before, he'd spoken to a Stars and Stripes correspondent about his approach to warfare. "Some people around here think I'm nuts," he'd said, "but I just believe that if we're going to fight a war, we have to get on with it. 60 minutes an hour, 24 hours a day." Those words carried the weight of his entire philosophy, the conviction that would soon transform an unarmed spotter plane into one of the most unlikely weapons ever to take to the skies. Carpenter was a former high school history teacher from Illinois, a man who'd taken an unconventional path to this moment. He'd mounted 6 bazookas to the wing struts of his aircraft, 6 of them. The German tankers below had no idea what was coming. Their 45-ton Panthers and 57-ton Tigers were about to face an adversary so improbable that it seemed like something from fiction. A plane barely weighing 1,220 pounds. Covered in fabric you could punch a hole through with a pistol. Powered by a 65-horsepower Continental engine that produced less power than the cooling fan on a Tiger tank. A machine that could barely reach 85 miles per hour, slower than the traverse speed of a Panther's turret. The Germans would come to call him the Mad Major, and by day's end, 2 Panthers would be burning in the French countryside. The Battle of Araucourt represented something significant for the Germans, their last major armored push in the Lorraine region. General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army had assembled an enormous force for this operation. 262 tanks and assault guns, including elite units like the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades and the veteran 11th Panzer Division. They'd fielded 107 Panthers and 75 Panzer IVs, supported by 80 assault guns. It was meant to be overwhelming. Among them advanced the 113th Panzer Brigade, hastily assembled but equipped with Germany's most advanced armor. The Panthers, mounting those high-velocity 75mm guns, could destroy any Allied tank from over 2,000 meters away. Their frontal armor, sloped at 55 degrees, was 80 millimeters thick, enough to deflect most anti-tank weapons the Americans could throw at them. But the German designers had overlooked something crucial. The roof armor was thin, 16 to 25 millimeters on the Panthers, 25 on the Tigers. German engineers had focused on threats from ground level, never imagining danger from above, and certainly never from an observation plane. Throughout the war, German doctrine had treated L4 Grasshoppers as harmless. Aircraft sent up to spot targets and adjust artillery fire. Not worth engaging, really. Shooting at them would only reveal your position and bring down American artillery. That calculation was about to change forever, but the Germans didn't know it yet. The man in the cockpit had an unusual background for a combat pilot. Charles Marston Carpenter was born in rural Illinois on August 29, 1912, into a farming family that watched everything disappear during the Great Depression. His parents divorced when he was young. Charles and his siblings worked on neighbors' farms just to survive, but he was bright. Scholarships took him to Roosevelt Military Academy, then to college in Kentucky. Before the war, he taught history at Moline High School, where he met Elder Fritschel. They married in 1940 and had a daughter named Carol. Then America entered the fighting in 1942. At 30, Carpenter enlisted. He received his commission as a second lieutenant and completed flight training. By 1944, he'd made major and was assigned to the 1st Bombardment Division in France. They transferred him to fly artillery support for General George Patton's 4th Armored Division. His job was reconnaissance, spotting targets, adjusting fire. He also served as personal pilot for General John Wood, the division commander, which gave him something unusual, the freedom to pursue his own ideas. In August, he'd written home to Elder. "Lately I've been taking quite a few chances, but my luck has been marvelous. Yesterday, I got a bullet hole through the wing and hit a church steeple with one wheel. It was very little compared to what might have happened. His approach to warfare was straightforward. Attack, attack, and attack again. He told an Associated Press correspondent named Wes Gallagher. That was his strategy. Carpenter wasn't the first to think about arming an L4. Lieutenants Harley Merrick and Roy Carson had experimented with mounting bazookas on their observation planes earlier and successfully destroyed some German trucks. But Carpenter would take the concept further than anyone had imagined. Working with ordnance technicians, he developed a mounting system. Two M1A1 bazookas attached to the wing struts at first, backed by plywood plates to distribute the weight and recoil across the fragile structure. Wiring ran from the launch tubes to toggle switches in his cockpit, allowing him to fire the rockets individually or as salvos. But tests revealed problems. The 2.36-inch rockets could penetrate about 3 inches of armor. Fine for light vehicles, but marginal against tank plating. He upgraded to 6 M9 bazookas, firing the improved M6A3 high-explosive anti-tank rounds. These could penetrate 3.9 inches of armor at a 30-degree impact angle, enough to defeat the thin roof armor of any German tank. The complete installation added roughly 106 pounds to an aircraft already operating at its absolute maximum weight limit. With his gross weight at 1,220 pounds and the pilot, fuel, and equipment consuming most of that, Carpenter had to fly alone. The observer's seat stayed empty. There simply wasn't the lift capacity for another person. The bazookas created substantial drag, slowing his already modest top speed and making the aircraft sluggish in turns. The plane designed for gentle observation flights was now carrying the firepower of a half-dozen infantry anti-tank teams. Actually hitting a tank from an L4 seemed impossible on paper. The aircraft had no gun sight, no aiming system beyond the pilot's eye and instinct. The bazookas were fixed to fire straight ahead, meaning Carpenter had to point the entire aircraft at his target. The rockets had an effective range of about 300 yards, but accuracy dropped sharply beyond 100 yards. To actually make hits, he'd developed a specific attack profile that would become his trademark technique. Starting from about 1,500 feet altitude, he'd spot his target and begin a corkscrew descent, spiraling down in a way that confused anti-aircraft gunners below. The spiral approach made it nearly impossible for ground forces to predict his flight path and establish a proper lead for their weapons. At roughly 300 feet, he'd level out briefly, align his aircraft with the target, then push into a steep dive. This was where it took nerve. At 100 yards, barely 300 feet from the target, he'd toggle his firing switches and watch the rockets streak toward the enemy armor. Immediately after firing, he'd pull up sharply, using every bit of the L4's limited power to climb away from the inevitable storm of return fire. The entire sequence, from beginning the dive to climbing away, took less than 30 seconds. But those 30 seconds were the most vulnerable of all. The Continental engine struggled with the added weight and drag. The plane's normal climb rate of 450 feet per minute dropped to barely 200 feet per minute when loaded with rockets. Every foot of altitude mattered. Every foot meant another second away from effective small arms range, another moment to plan the next attack. That morning, Colonel Bruce Clark's command near Arracore was holding positions when intelligence reported German armor massing for an attack. Carpenter took off despite the weather, betting that conditions would improve. When the fog lifted around noon, he was already airborne, hunting for targets. Below him, elements of the 113th Panzer Brigade were advancing, a company of Panther tanks moving across open ground toward American positions. The German crews, trained to scan for enemy tanks and anti-tank guns, never considered the small observation plane circling overhead as any kind of threat. Carpenter began his attack run, entering that characteristic corkscrew descent he'd perfected. The dive was steep, the aircraft shuddering as speed built up. At precisely 100 yards he fired, 6 rockets streaking toward the lead Panther. The rockets struck the thin roof armor, piercing through into the crew compartment. The tank lurched to a stop, smoke poured from its hatches. Banking hard left, Carpenter climbed away as machine gun fire erupted from the German column. He could hear bullets punching through the fabric skin of his aircraft as he fought for altitude, Within 30 minutes, he'd landed, reloaded, and was airborne again. The second sortie found the Germans trying to reorganize. They'd spread out, making themselves harder targets, but also disrupting their own advance. Carpenter selected another Panther and dove again. This time the Germans were ready. Small arms fire filled the air around his aircraft. The sound of bullets tearing through fabric accompanied him throughout the dive, but his aim stayed true. Another Panther was knocked out, its turret crew killed by the blast that penetrated the 16mm roof armor. On his third sortie that afternoon, the surviving tanks were beginning to reverse, their advance completely disrupted. By day's end, Carpenter had fired 16 rockets total. 2 Panther tanks confirmed destroyed. The German advance halted. The legend of Bazooka Charlie was born. The 4th Armored Division's official history would specifically note his role in stopping that German counterattack. Before his attacks, German military doctrine treated observation aircraft as minor irritants. Standard procedure was to ignore them unless they posed an immediate threat. Engaging them would reveal positions and invite artillery strikes, a poor tactical trade. That calculation changed completely after word spread about rocket-armed L4s. German units began receiving urgent bulletins warning about American observation planes carrying anti-tank weapons. What had been harmless spotters were now potential tank killers requiring immediate engagement. Carpenter noticed the change immediately. "Every time I show up now, they shoot with everything they have," he told a Stars and Stripes reporter. "They never used to bother Cubs. Bazooka must be bothering them a bit." The impact went beyond the tanks actually destroyed. Tank commanders now had to constantly watch the skies for slow-moving aircraft. Formations had to spread out when L4s appeared, disrupting their momentum and coordination. Anti-aircraft weapons had to be redirected from protecting against fighter bombers to engaging observation planes. Infantry units were ordered to engage any L4 with rifles and machine pistols, creating a curtain of fire that made low-altitude operations increasingly hazardous. The 113th Panzer Brigade, which had entered the Battle of Araucourt with 90 tanks, would have only 27 operational within a week. While not all those losses came from Carpenter's attacks, his operations contributed to the psychological pressure that degraded German combat effectiveness. Tank crews, who'd felt relatively safe from air attack in poor weather, now faced a threat that could materialize at any moment. October 1944 saw Carpenter refine his tactics and increase his effectiveness. Now famous within the Third Army, he was given freedom to hunt targets of opportunity. That month alone, he was credited with destroying 4 more tanks and an armored truck, bringing his official total to 6 tanks destroyed, including 2 Tiger I heavy tanks as part of that total. On October 4th, Carpenter engaged a column of German armor attempting a counterattack near Chateau Sala. Diving through intense small arms fire, he destroyed a Panzer IV with a direct hit to its engine deck. The burning tank blocked a narrow road, trapping the vehicles behind it and making them easy targets for American tank destroyers. A week later, near Muncourt Woods, Carpenter spotted Tiger tanks supporting a German infantry attack. The Tigers, with their 88mm guns and heavy armor, were the most feared tanks in the German arsenal. Each weighed 57 tons and mounted armor up to 100mm thick on the front hull, but their roof armor was only 25mm, still vulnerable to Carpenter's rockets. His attack on the Tigers required exceptional courage. These tanks were typically surrounded by infantry and light anti-aircraft guns specifically positioned to protect against air attack. Carpenter dove through a curtain of tracer fire, released his rockets at minimum range, and pulled up just as explosions erupted behind him. 1 Tiger was confirmed destroyed, its ammunition detonating in a spectacular explosion. The impact extended beyond the physical destruction. German tank crews, already stressed by American material superiority, now faced a threat from an unexpected direction. The skies were no longer safe, the trees no longer offered protection, and Carpenter quickly discovered why. Those little L4s could spot them anyway, nestled among branches or hidden in forest clearings. The sound of their engines became something to fear rather than ignore. Any one of those aircraft buzzing overhead might be carrying rockets. Every sortie he flew tested the absolute limits of what physics and luck could accomplish. Nobody had ever designed the L4 for fighting. Its fuel tanks lacked self-sealing capability, meaning a single tracer round could transform the plane into an inferno. The pilot's position left him desperately exposed, surrounded by nothing but thin steel tubes and fabric, completely vulnerable to enemy gunfire from every direction. Carpenter wrote home about the hazards, though the military censors scrutinized every word to prevent his wife from worrying. After a particularly harrowing flight, he kept his description sparse. Had some excitement today. The plane has a few more holes, but still flies fine. He left out the crucial details that would have terrified her. Those holes weren't just cosmetic damage. Each one represented a near miss that could have severed critical control cables, ruptured fuel lines, or struck him fatally. The ground crew tending to Rosie the rocketer started tracking the damage informally. After intense combat missions, they would methodically count the bullet holes peppering the fuselage, cataloging patches needed. Following particularly brutal engagements, the tally grew staggering. One crew chief supposedly remarked to other pilots that Carpenter's aircraft resembled Swiss cheese after facing concentrated fire, yet somehow both machine and pilot kept flying. The emotional strain proved overwhelming. Unlike bomber crews operating at 20,000 feet, relatively insulated from combat's immediate brutality, Carpenter fought at close range, where violence became visceral and personal. German soldiers firing up at him became distinct individuals. Tank commanders' faces were visible as they recognized what was happening. Combat wasn't abstract or distant anymore. West Gallagher, an Associated Press correspondent who spoke with Carpenter multiple times, wrote in Liberty magazine about the Major's exceptional bravery within an organization already famous for reckless courage. Yet Gallagher noticed something else in Carpenter's gaze, a deep weariness that spoke of a man who had repeatedly wagered everything on probability and understood the odds weren't infinite. The bazooka installation underwent constant evolution based on lessons learned in actual fighting. Early attempts using simple metal brackets proved inadequate. Recoil gradually worked those brackets loose. Plywood backing plates distributed the impact better, though they added critical weight to an already strained airframe. The electrical firing system created its own headaches. Wiring had to thread through wings and into the cockpit, protected from weather and gunfire alike. Toggle switches occupied a simple panel near Carpenter's right hand, each controlling one rocket for single shots or rapid volleys. The system needed reliability despite hours of vibration and violent maneuvers, yet required only basic tools for repairs. Aiming depended entirely on vision and instinct. Carpenter developed his own targeting system, using the engine cowling, the cockpit's framework, and even scratches etched into the windscreen as reference points. He mentally calculated deflection angles based on his approach velocity and descent angle, accounting for wind and the rocket's trajectory. There existed no backup method, no alternative approach. Missing meant climbing away under fire to attempt another pass. The M6A3 rockets themselves posed unusual difficulties. Military doctrine designed these heat rounds for ground combat, fired from a soldier's shoulder at relatively stationary targets. Launched from a moving aircraft, their precision deteriorated substantially. The rocket motor consumed only 0.3 seconds of fuel before coasting toward its target. Wind, aircraft movement, and inherent inaccuracies meant that even flawless aim couldn't guarantee success. The Battle of Aracourt became Carpenter's defining moment, though it represented far more than a single engagement. This stood as the largest tank battle across the Western Front, with American forces ultimately destroying 200 German tanks and assault guns, while losing only 25. Germany's 5th Panzer Army aimed to shatter American defenses and reclaim Nancy, threatening Patton's entire offensive strategy. The attacking formations included Germany's remaining elite armored units, though many operated below strength after the Normandy catastrophe. Carpenter's 4th Armored Division absorbed the main German assault. Heavily outnumbered, they compensated through tactical superiority, better supply systems, and creative solutions like Carpenter's tank hunting Cub. The division's tank destroyers, artillery, and armor coordinated seamlessly, with Carpenter furnishing reconnaissance and direct strike capability. His September 20th actions arrived at a critical moment. German forces had achieved initial surprise, threatening to overwhelm several American positions. By disrupting the Panther Company's assault, Carpenter gave American units precious time to stabilize and receive reinforcements. This wasn't merely a tactical victory, it rippled through the entire battle's operational scope. German tank crews accustomed to relative safety from air attack, since American fighters rarely operated in poor weather, now faced an unexpected threat. L4s could strike even in conditions grounding everything else. Constant vigilance became necessary, scanning skies constantly and dispersing when tiny aircraft appeared. This disruption slowed German operations and hampered their coordination. By November, Carpenter had become a familiar name within Third Army. Stars and Stripes published multiple articles about Bazooka Charlie. Popular Science featured him in February 1945's issue under What's New in Aviation, Piper Cub Tank Buster. By the early 1970s, the New York Sun and other outlets resurrected his story, establishing him among the war's most celebrated European theater pilots. Yet fame brought escalating peril. German commanders specifically warned units about rocket-equipped Cubs. Anti-aircraft defenses received reinforcements, with additional light weapons and machine guns positioned specifically to counter L4 threats. Each mission grew progressively more dangerous as German gunners developed experience against slow-moving targets at low altitude. Carpenter's remarks to reporters revealed his resigned perspective. "Some people think I'm nuts," he admitted, "but I believe that fighting a war means going at it 60 minutes every hour and 24 hours daily." When danger was mentioned, he simply shrugged. "My luck has been marvelous." That luck faced repeated trials. Beyond the church steeple incident he'd mentioned in correspondence, other escapes happened. Machine gun fire severed an elevator control cable once, leaving him barely able to manage pitch control during his flight back to friendly positions. Another time, an anti-aircraft shell detonated close enough to shower his airframe with shrapnel, somehow missing him and the vital control systems. His crew chief, whose identity disappeared into history, supposedly pleaded with Carpenter to stop flying rocket missions. The ground crews had witnessed too many Cubs return with devastating damage or simply not return. Still, Carpenter persisted, driven by duty and determination that inspired yet concerned his fellow pilots. His courage extended beyond aerial dogfights. At least once, documented accounts show Carpenter landing his L4 beside a battlefield, retrieving a discarded M1 rifle and joining ground combat. After obliterating a German column with his rockets, he landed on a road nearby and captured 6 German soldiers single-handedly, marching them to American lines at gunpoint. Another occasion found Carpenter landing near a crippled American Sherman tank, receiving German fire. He scrambled onto the tank and manned the .50 caliber machine gun, helping repel a German infantry assault while the crew completed emergency repairs. The tank soldiers credited him with preserving their lives. General Patton himself handed Carpenter the Silver Star, supposedly saying this represented the fighting man he wanted serving. Carpenter would receive the Bronze Star with Oak Leaf Cluster and the Air Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster. These ground actions revealed Carpenter's fundamental character. He wasn't content being merely an observer or even an airborne tank killer. He desired to be wherever fighting occurred, utilizing whatever weapons lay available. While admirable, this attitude suggested a man transgressing reasonable self-preservation limits. Official records acknowledged 6 tanks destroyed total, including 2 Tiger I heavy tanks among that number, plus multiple armored vehicles and trucks. Unofficial witness accounts suggest the total reached 14 tanks destroyed or damaged. The discrepancy probably stems from confirming kills during fluid combat when multiple weapon systems targeted identical targets. Each verified kill required perfect circumstances. Weather needed to permit flying while preventing German fighter activity. Carpenter had to discover targets, approach without getting shot down, achieve precise rocket hits on vulnerable spots, and survive returning. Success demanded extraordinary probability alignment. Consider the technical reality: striking approximately a 20 by 10 foot target, representing a tank's upper armor dimensions, while traveling 70 miles per hour from roughly 100 yards away. launching unguided rockets from an unstable platform while receiving fire. 3 witnesses who observed Carpenter's attacks described them as impossible and insane. The Tiger Iron tanks particularly impressed observers. Every Tiger required 250,000 Reichsmarks to manufacture and demanded specially trained crews needing months of preparation. Most Allied weapons couldn't penetrate their armor, yet rockets fired from an aircraft costing merely $2,500 and needing only basic flying ability proved devastatingly effective. Carpenter served beyond tank destruction. As observation pilot and General Wood's personal aviator, he furnished critical intelligence directing operational choices. His ability flying slow and low, combined with aggressive reconnaissance techniques, meant he frequently spotted German maneuvers before other intelligence sources detected them. His reports determined several critical decisions throughout the Lorraine offensive, when German units assembled for counterattacks. Carpenter's warnings enabled American commanders positioning reserves and artillery accordingly. His assessments of German defensive arrangements improved attack planning, reducing casualties. Intelligence work, though less glamorous than tank destruction, possibly represented his greatest contribution. Information he supplied preserved American lives and abbreviated engagements, avoiding prolonged attrition warfare. Interestingly, Germany possessed nothing equivalent to this effective simple aircraft, despite its advanced technology reputation. The Wehrmacht relied on the Fieseler Fe 156 Storch for comparable duties, yet it was larger, more complicated, and constructed in severely limited quantities. American mass production of straightforward, reliable equipment surpassed German emphasis on sophisticated technology. The L4 basically represented a civilian plane drafted into military service with minimal adjustments. Simplicity constituted its advantage, requiring minimal flying expertise, maintenance, and basic repair resources. Germany's tank creators built magnificent machines optimized for tank combat. Panthers carried long 75mm guns, destroying any Allied tank at ranges where counterfire couldn't reach them. Frontal plates resisted most Allied weapons. Yet this ground combat specialization generated vulnerabilities simple American ingenuity exploited. The bazooka itself expressed American practicality. Quickly developed and mass-produced enormously, it furnished every infantry squad with anti-tank capability. When Carpenter mounted 6 onto an observation plane, he constructed a weapons platform German military planning never predicted and couldn't adequately counter. As 1944 became 1945, Carpenter persisted flying combat despite intensifying German awareness. Commanders distributed instructions for combating armed observation aircraft, dedicating anti-aircraft guns for tracking them. December brought the Battle of the Bulge, with Carpenter flying reconnaissance through terrible weather that stopped most flights. His reports on German movements assisted American commanders responding to the surprise attack. January 1945 initiated renewed offensives as American units advanced toward the Rhine. Carpenter continuously refined his approaches, testing different attack patterns and rocket arrangements. He supposedly considered additional rockets, but faced weight limitations and wing strut capacity restrictions. February brought his final confirmed tank kill, destroying a Panzer IV defending a bridge. Accounts describe him diving through machine gun fire, delivering rockets at nearly contact distance. The destroyed tank permitted American engineers capturing the crossing intact, accelerating the German advance. March brought extreme exhaustion, forcing reduced flying. Medical evaluation revealed advanced Hodgkin's disease, a lymphatic cancer. Army physicians predicted 2 remaining years. The diagnosis halted combat flying permanently. He was transported stateside for treatment, departing Rosie the Rocketer and his established reputation as one of history's most extraordinary aces. His fighting concluded, though the broader conflict continued 2 additional months. The timing possibly benefited him. As German desperation intensified during final months, anti-aircraft firepower became increasingly deadly. Multiple L4s attempting repeating Carpenter's methods were destroyed in March and April 1945. His particular aerial warfare window was narrowing. Carpenter received honorable discharge in 1946 and resumed teaching. He defied every medical expectation, living far beyond the 2 years his doctors had predicted. Back home in Illinois, he took up teaching history at Urbana High School, rebuilding a life with his wife and their daughter Carol. Yet he carried his wartime service quietly, rarely speaking of what he'd experienced during those brutal years in Europe. His daughter would later reveal how little she actually knew about her father's combat record until after he passed away. This silence wasn't unusual among men who'd seen combat, though it carried special weight given just how extraordinary his service had been. During summer months, he operated a boys' camp deep in the Ozarks, where he focused on outdoor skills and character building. The men who attended decades later, now reflecting as older adults themselves, described him as tough but fair, demanding yet genuinely supportive of his campers. They had no idea they were being mentored by one of the war's most decorated tank hunters. Throughout the 1950s and into the early 60s, his health declined steadily. The Hodgkin's disease that should have taken his life back in 1947 instead became something he managed for 2 full decades. He remained in the classroom until shortly before his death on March 22, 1966, just 53 years old. Meanwhile, the fate of Rosie the Rocketer slipped into obscurity for many years. The little aircraft had almost certainly been scrapped along with countless other leftover L4s from the war, its historical significance lost to time and neglect. Then came October 2017, when aviation historians made a discovery that changed everything. Serial number 433426 turned up in the collection of the Austrian Aviation Museum in Bad Voslau. The exact path the aircraft took to Austria remains a mystery to this day, yet the evidence proved conclusively it had belonged to Carpenter. The serial numbers and other identifying marks were unmistakable. Most remarkably, the plane still bore the scars of combat. Multiple professionally repaired bullet holes testified to what it had endured. In 2019, the Collings Foundation purchased the aircraft and transported it back to American soil. The restoration work that followed was painstaking and thorough, with historians and technical experts working carefully to recreate its wartime appearance. Those bullet hole repairs were kept intact, preserved as physical evidence of the violence the aircraft had survived. As the restoration progressed, experts uncovered details about Carpenter's modifications that hadn't been fully documented before. The mounting points where the bazookas had been attached remained visible on the wing struts. Examining the patched areas revealed that bullets had struck from different directions, confirming the accounts of heavy incoming fire from multiple angles. Several patches overlapped one another, indicating the aircraft had been repaired multiple times between sorties. Though Carpenter's bazooka-equipped L4 never became an officially sanctioned weapon system, his concept fundamentally changed how military leaders thought about air support. The realization that ground troops needed their own dedicated air assets, not dependent on Air Force schedules and priorities, gained credibility through what Carpenter had accomplished. The Korean War experimented with armed light aircraft to limited effect, though nothing matched what Carpenter achieved. Real validation of his thinking came later with the development of attack helicopters in the 1960s. The AH-1 Cobra, and later the Apache, embodied the exact same principle Carpenter had pioneered. Slow-moving platforms operating at low altitude, delivering precise fire directly to ground forces. Modern military doctrine now acknowledges the value of what Carpenter demonstrated, that air support doesn't always mean fast jets dropping heavy ordnance. Sometimes a platform that can stay aloft, observe, and deliver firepower accurately at close range proves far more effective than high-speed bombing runs. Carpenter's improvised weapon system also shaped military thinking about field innovations and creative solutions from soldiers themselves. The military hierarchy became increasingly receptive to ideas from the ranks, recognizing that troops in the field often developed practical approaches that desk-bound engineers might never consider. In 2023, Carpenter's daughter Carol co-authored a book with aviation writer James P. Boucher, telling the remarkable story of Major Charles Carpenter and his famous aircraft. The volume drew on hundreds of preserved letters and photographs that illuminated the person beneath the legend. His correspondence revealed someone more complex than any warrior myth, courageous without being reckless, aggressive yet thoughtful in his approach. His writing demonstrated someone grappling with war's moral weight while remaining absolutely committed to his duty. He expressed satisfaction in what he'd accomplished, but also genuine sadness about the killing the war demanded. After destroying a particularly impressive German tank, he penned a letter reflecting on the enemy's humanity. Those men had families, mothers and fathers, perhaps children waiting for them. Yet they were determined to kill my brothers in arms, and I couldn't permit that. This capacity for moral reflection, paired with tactical excellence, set him apart among fighting men. When interviewed later, Carol described her father as inherently peaceful, someone who had compartmentalized his war years and moved forward emotionally. She reflected that he came back from the fighting broken in spirit, and my mother endured an incredibly difficult time as well. She'd waited 4 long years for his return, believing he might never come home. A bronze monument was erected at Moline High School in 2023, portraying him standing beside his L4. The ceremony drew veterans, scholars, and aviation enthusiasts from every corner of the country. Former students, themselves now elderly, shared recollections of an instructor dedicated to his craft, never once revealing his extraordinary wartime record. The American Heritage Museum in Massachusetts, home to the fully restored Rosie the Rocketer with its combat damage carefully preserved, constructed a comprehensive display about Carpenter's achievements. Visitors encounter the actual aircraft, complete with its patched battle scars, and discover the story of how one man transformed a simple observation plane into a destroyer of tanks. Through the Experimental Aircraft Association, Carpenter's exploits feature prominently in teaching programs, held up as an example of American innovation and determination. Student pilots learn not merely his tactical accomplishments, but how genuine thinking transforms obstacles into possibilities. Military scholars continue examining Carpenter's methods and their significance in the Lorraine campaign. While 6 confirmed tank destroys seem small against the thousands of tanks lost across the broader war, the psychological and tactical consequences extended far beyond those numbers. Carpenter's accomplishments posed vital questions regarding innovation, bravery, and the transformation of warfare itself. How could a regular history instructor with no specialized military training become one of warfare's most unusual warriors? The explanation emerges from several converging circumstances. First, his role as General Wood's personal pilot afforded him unusual autonomy to pursue independent operations. Most L4 operators followed rigid reconnaissance routines and schedules. Carpenter possessed the freedom to hunt targets as he discovered them, deciding his own moment and location for engagement. Second, his background in teaching might have sharpened his tactical instincts. History educators perceive patterns, understand consequences and effects, and recognize timing's importance. Carpenter transferred these intellectual capabilities to the battlefield, spotting weaknesses that escaped others' notice. Third, the distinctive situation of the Lorraine campaign generated perfect conditions for his unconventional approach. The relatively exposed landscape, dense German armored forces, and unstable battle lines meant opportunities existed for someone willing to display the necessary boldness. Most fundamentally, Carpenter possessed an exceptional mixture of courage and acceptance of fate that enabled him to repeatedly gamble with his survival. His remark about attacking 60 minutes per hour and 24 hours daily unveiled someone who'd internalized the real danger and concluded that if death came anyway, he'd ensure it meant something. Analyzing Carpenter's combat statistics carefully demonstrates how improbable his accomplishments truly were. 6 tanks officially credited as destroyed, with 2 Tiger I heavy tanks included in that count. Numerous armored vehicles and trucks eliminated. 16 rockets expended across just 3 separate sorties on September 20, 1944 alone. Roughly 100 combat missions completed. Not a single L4 Grasshopper destroyed, despite absorbing multiple bullet strikes. A single pilot enduring probabilities that should have been fatal. Each number masks dozens of split-second calculations, any single one potentially ending in catastrophe. The fact that Carpenter made it through his tour alive represented a mathematical impossibility. Other pilots attempting equivalent maneuvers rarely survived beyond a handful of missions. The financial calculation was equally striking. Carpenter's modified L4, including all adjustments, cost roughly $5,000 total. Each Tiger tank he destroyed represented over 250,000 Reichsmarks in manufacturing expenses, before accounting for crew training and delivery expenses. In pure economic terms, Carpenter achieved perhaps the war's most dramatic cost-benefit ratio. Despite the extensive record, mysteries surrounding Carpenter's service persist. How did he maintain psychological equilibrium flying such perilous missions repeatedly? What motivated him to escalate from the already hazardous role of scout pilot into direct combat engagement? His letters provide partial insight but no definitive explanation. He references duty, his commitment to protecting his comrades, his longing for the war's conclusion, and his return home. Yet these understandable motivations don't completely account for the extraordinary dangers he willingly encountered. The answer might reflect his era's character. Those who fought World War II had lived through economic depression, comprehending genuine deprivation and hardship. They'd observed fascism's ascendancy and grasped its menace to freedom itself. For someone like Carpenter, educated in history and conscious of the stakes, partial commitment seemed insufficient. Or perhaps the explanation was less complicated. During warfare, regular individuals accomplish remarkable feats because the circumstances necessitate it. Carpenter recognized the problem, German armor destroying American soldiers, and fashioned a solution, however unconventional. That executing this solution required piloting a fabric aircraft into point-blank enemy fire represented merely an acceptable cost. Beyond military tactics, Carpenter's innovations became woven into broader American mythology. The notion that an enterprising individual with modest equipment could defeat advanced enemy technology through sheer will and originality. This idea resonated powerfully in post-war America as the nation processed its triumph over adversaries that appeared so overwhelming. Carpenter's story provided an ideal David and Goliath parallel. American pragmatism and individual ingenuity prevailing against German technological sophistication and military hierarchy. Carpenter's narrative additionally transformed military attitudes about creative thinking. Rather than dismissing novel approaches from junior ranks, leadership became increasingly open to creative field solutions and improvements originating from enlisted personnel. The message from Carpenter's achievements was straightforward. Innovation frequently originates from individuals closest to problems themselves. For aviation specialists, Carpenter's exploits illustrated light aircraft's remarkable adaptability. The basic Piper Cub, originally intended for training and recreation, had demonstrated capabilities far beyond its designer's original vision. This flexibility influenced subsequent aircraft engineering, with manufacturers progressively designing machines suitable for multiple applications. The narrative of Charles "Bazooka" Charlie Carpenter contradicts standard military biography. A history educator maneuvering an unarmed scout plane shouldn't have managed destroying heavy German armor. A fabric-constructed aircraft equipped with only a 65-horsepower motor should never have withstood successive combat operations under enemy fire. 6 bazookas fastened to wing supports shouldn't have produced an effective combat instrument. Yet everything transpired. Between September 1944 and February 1945, Carpenter revolutionized the L4 Grasshopper, converting it from a passive observer into a potent weapons platform. His official record of 6 tank destructions, encompassing 2 Tiger Van heavy tanks, ranks among military aviation's most astonishing feats. German forces stationed at Aricourt and throughout the Lorraine campaign grew to dread the sound of small aircraft approaching. Previously harmless spotters had become unexpected threats raining destruction from above. Tank personnel accustomed to relative safety from American fighter bombers, which operated infrequently during inclement conditions or at altitude, confronted an adversary they couldn't successfully engage. The shift in German response, from disregarding L4s to attacking them with every available weapon, demonstrates one pilot's profound operational impact. Carpenter pressured Wehrmacht commanders to reconfigure air defenses, fragment tank formations, and maintain continual airspace vigilance against slower aircraft. These tactical modifications disrupted German operations and facilitated American advancement throughout the Lorraine campaign. Fundamentally, Carpenter's legacy transcends military achievements. It demonstrates the supremacy of ingenuity over established convention. Confronted with German armored superiority, he fashioned an unorthodox answer from available resources and determination. The bazookas originated from infantry arsenals. The L4 served reconnaissance functions. Welded together by someone prepared to sacrifice everything, they materialized into something neither manufacturers nor Pentagon strategists had conceived. The meticulously restored Rosie the Rocketer, exhibited with its wounds preserved, exemplifies American innovation and personal valor. Each patched penetration marks an instant when failure should have occurred, yet Carpenter pressed onward. The aircraft destined for destruction multiple times instead endured, transmitting its account to coming ages. Charles Carpenter departed in 1966, having surpassed his doctor's predictions by 19 years. His remaining decades involved instructing American youngsters in historical subjects, perhaps hoping they'd grasp that regular individuals accomplish extraordinary achievements when situations demand it. His classes remembered him as rigorous but reasonable, unaware they'd learned from someone who'd fundamentally altered aerial warfare via inventiveness and determination. The Wehrmacht tankers who confronted him across the French landscape would have been astounded to discover their antagonist was an educator teaching teenagers. Learning that the apparatus menacing them comprised nothing more than half a dozen infantry rockets affixed to a civilian aircraft would have amazed them equally. Yet they might have acknowledged the deeper understanding. Throughout history, ingenuity, bravery, and commitment overcome seemingly unbeatable circumstances. The L4 Grasshopper that pursued panthers and tigers throughout the French countryside validated that David still defeats Goliath, particularly when David possesses half a dozen projectiles and the courage to deploy them within touching distance. Ultimately, Carpenter's narrative conveys perhaps its deepest instruction. Human creativity and sheer courage possess the power to convert the most unremarkable implements into instruments of triumph.